Okay, here with me to help inform our coverage and on the police response in particular is Pierre-Yves Bourduas, the former RCMP Deputy Commissioner. PY, it's good to see you on a day like this. We appreciate you bringing expertise here.
Yes.
I'd like to start with what I was talking about with Larry Neufeld and just sort of the response we saw to the active shooter yesterday from the RCMP. Just walk us through, like, what would be the resourcing and staffing levels in a detachment in an area like the Peace River District in a community like this one?
Yeah, well, according to the website, they are currently at this detachment, Tumbler Ridge. Tumbler Ridge. Yep. There are 5 members that are currently assigned to this particular area. So when the call came in, immediately the RCMP responded. The Premier indicated 2 minutes they were there at the scene. And in the press briefing this afternoon, their Deputy Commissioner McDonald indicated that there were some gun exchange fires, and the RCMP moved in, and according to the Premier, this immediate action could have prevented something a lot more serious than what is currently the results of this tragedy.
Okay, so the full detachment is 5 members, right? So like, normally in an active shooter situation, like here in Ottawa, there would be a tactical unit and different layers of policing, obviously. Correct. None of that would be available. Would this normally be very experienced officers, people out of depot, like first kind of posting? What was the profile of this sort of unit typically?
Well, normally these are where young members start their profession as police officers, and having worked in rural Canada for 15 years, you get to be very connected with the community. Community-based policing is what the RCMP is promoting. So it stands to reason that when a call of that nature comes in, training kicks in immediately. These officers get into their vehicle and get to the scene as quickly as possible. The marked difference between Canadian response and the U.S. response, and we've witnessed this in some U.S. situation where officers armed to the teeth surrounded the school and waited for additional support before moving in.
Right.
In Canada, we learned from Polytechnique in Montreal, where learning from this lesson, now police officers throughout Canada, by and large, will move in and try to eliminate the threat as quickly as possible.
Okay, because we saw that with Uvalde, Texas, right? Which was one of the, it's a policing failure, I think it is safe to say.
Correct.
Where they hesitated, delayed, and simply waited, and that led to more people being killed. But in this case, and this is bad. I mean, 8 people dead, 2 more, a 12-year-old and a 19-year-old, a girl and a woman in hospital, and teachers or educators killed. It could have potentially been worse if the police had not acted the way they did.
Correct. And also what was interesting is how quickly the support came in from surrounding detachments, and the helicopter was there to examine what was going on. What I took out of the press conference this afternoon from Deputy Commissioner McDonald is the fact that the RCMP has learned a great deal, but they are trying to analyze, what was the profile of this individual that committed this particular tragedy. Of course, there were some issues with the family. The RCMP has recognized that they've attended this particular residence. There were mental health issues. And the RCMP will step back after the investigation and will try to determine, have they missed something where there are signals in a small community that they should have acted on and didn't.
Okay. Yeah. Well, no, that's where I wanted to go next, because I think when you lay it out that there's 5 officers there, that would explain the gaps in the communications, because, the number of casualties, the 25 people who presented as injured that took up some time. But this was the other revelation today, right? That there have been repeated interactions over a period of years, mental health issues. Guns were seized at the house where the shooter lived. Now, that was years back. I don't think there was anything in the weeks leading up to this based on the calendar we're given. But people will look at like guns, repeated mental health visits. This should have been a red flag. How do you process those?
Well, the big question is red flagged up to a certain point, and how many red flags do you need to act? And because you have to bear in mind that the RCMP has to operate within a certain legal framework. So therefore, the deputy commissioner indicated this afternoon that guns were seized, and they managed the mental health issues at the time. But of course, things could be percolating up to a certain point, and then things flare up again, and that is probably what happened with the unfortunate tragedy that surfaced yesterday.
The other thing that has been suggested by the RCMP last night, I'm not sure if it was repeated again today, but the suggestion was that we may never know what the motive was. There is no clear established motive, though the killing of the shooter's mother and stepbrother is where it started and then went to the school.
Yep.
How hard would it be to determine what the motive was in a community this size, with someone you've interacted with as a police agency for a period of years, to come up with a probable reasoning for what happened?
Well, the RCMP will probably conduct a psychological autopsy on this particular individual, trying to determine whether or not, for instance, it was mentioned that there was a gender change over the last 6 years.
Right.
What were the consequences? What was the reaction of the community? And then the RCMP will probably try to determine the online history of this particular individual to try to kind of have a better, clearer picture of what kind of mindset the individual had to create such an unspeakable tragedy for this small community. So therefore, there's going to be a lot of legwork that will need to be done by investigators on the ground to try to determine whether or not there were there were flags that should have been picked on and were not. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to bring closure to the community, to provide communities with additional information, because the trust needs to be maintained between, for instance, first responders, RCMP, and their community, because it's vital for the safety and security of not only this community, but rural community writ large in our country.
You mentioned the guns, and just for people to clarify at home, the seizure of guns at the residence several years ago were returned after the legal owner petitioned for them to be returned. We do not believe, based on the way that was portrayed today, PY, that this went back to that house necessarily. It might have been someone else's guns.
Correct.
But it's a little bit unclear there. But the information we got today was that a long gun and a modified handgun, to use the RCMP's phrase, were found at the scene of the incident, and that is all the RCMP will say while they investigate that. So we don't know the caliber, the capacity of either of these guns, because they're looking into who might have owned them, how they would have been acquired. What are the issues at play there, and why you wouldn't reveal that to the public at this stage?
Because there are a lot of, for the RCMP at this juncture, there are probably a lot of unknowns. And to share with the community writ large, finite details about origins of the gun and so on and so forth, there's a lot of variables there that will need to be managed by investigators in order to secure all the information in relation to the origins of the gun, where were they obtained, are we talking about a stolen firearm, handguns, and how these handguns were obtained by the perpetrator. So these are all questions that will need to be answered before the RCMP can provide answers to the community. What I found quite interesting in the unfolding of this particular drama is the fact that the RCMP actually provided last evening a very superficial details as to what actually transpired. Yeah. And there were a lot of frustration online with people saying, well, we didn't know about this, and there were a lot of speculation. The RCMP has learned a great deal from the tragedy, the mass casualty out of Nova Scotia, where they were severely criticized for not sharing details with the community. So they opened up yesterday, literally 5 hours after the tragedy, to provide a sense of relief by the community about what they know thus far, without going into finite details. And of course today they provided additional details, but what the public needs to know is that the RCMP needs to have concrete, solid information before they share this with the general public. And Deputy Commissioner McDonald recognized that, for instance, there were the number of actually casualties were not exact, and they needed to rectify today. So sometimes if you go and share information too fast, it can have a backlash, and you end up with having to rectify, facts that should have been maybe guarded initially and shared when it's solid and determined.
Okay, I want to explore that, but I just want to circle back to, I have a question about modified handgun. Mm-hmm. Is that to increase like firing capacity, the size, the number of bullets you can put? Like when we talk about a modified handgun, what is that police shorthand for?
Well, it could be a modified handgun could be something that is semi-automatic versus fully automatic.
Right.
Are we talking, for instance, and I'd be surprised, but it's a possibility of 3D printers. And, so these are all elements that...
Right. Was it a manufactured weapon as opposed to a... Well, they're all manufactured, but you know what I mean.
Well, smuggled, stolen. So these are all elements that investigators will need to uncover in order to determine the origin of the weapon and how this individual actually accessed these weapons. Something that needs to be actually determined in order to maybe have lessons learned for the RCMP in the future.